You know, whenever we decide to learn a new language, we almost always start the same way, right? You grab a book, you start with the alphabet, then you grind through endless vocabulary lists. But what if I told you that that exact method is probably why so many of us just give up? Well, today we're going to look at a totally counterintuitive approach from a polyglot named Kazuma. This guy mastered 12 languages by basically turning the traditional method completely on its head.
So let me ask you, seriously, if you were going to start learning, say, French or Japanese tomorrow, what's the very first thing you would do? For most people, the answer feels so obvious it's almost automatic. Yeah, you probably thought of the traditional path. Learn the letters, memorize words, and then tackle grammar. But Kazuma argues that this is exactly where we go wrong. His path looks, well, totally backward at first. He says you should start with whole phrases, then focus on the sound of the language, and only then let the grammar sort of sink in intuitively. And he learned this the hard way. This chart basically shows his own early failures, and I bet it sounds familiar to a lot of you. He did exactly what they teach us in school, just memorize huge lists of words. And what happened? Well, in a real conversation, he couldn't understand a thing, and all those words he memorized just wouldn't connect in his head. This is the dead end so many of us hit. Memorizing words in a vacuum, it just leads to frustration and eventually quitting. So if the old way is broken, what's the fix? Well, it all starts with step one, building a real practical foundation, not with single words, but with phrases and sounds. This right here is the first radical shift you have to make. Stop the flashcards with single, isolated words. Your new goal is to build a personal library of practical, useful phrases. You know, the kinds of sentences you'd actually use in a conversation. So why does this one little change work so well? Well, it's because phrases are useful right now. You can learn "where is the train station" and literally use it today. That gives you context for the words, sure, but way more importantly, it gives you a small win. And every one of those little successes builds your confidence and your motivation, which makes you want to keep going. You end up learning the vocabulary anyway, but as a natural side effect, not as a chore. Okay, so once you've got a small collection of useful phrases, the next move isn't grammar, it's sound. The key is to listen, really listen to how native speakers say those phrases, and then you have to imitate them. And yes, it has to be out loud.
This is one of Kazuma's biggest insights about pronunciation. If you can train your mouth to make a sound correctly, you're also training your ear to hear it correctly. You see, speaking and listening aren't two separate skills, they're really just two sides of the same coin. When you get better at one, the other one automatically gets better too. So how do you actually practice this? It's a super simple three-step loop. First, listen to a short phrase from a native speaker, like over and over again. Then, try to imitate it. Don't just focus on the words, focus on the music of it, the rhythm, the intonation. And finally, record your own voice and play it back, comparing it to the original. That little feedback loop is the absolute fastest way to start getting a natural feel for the language.
Okay, so you've started collecting phrases and imitating sounds. You're starting to feel the rhythm of the language. It's only now that we get to step two, building a mental framework to understand how all these pieces actually fit together. But wait a second. This is not the part where you go out and buy a massive, dense grammar textbook. That's the old way. Kazuma's whole idea here is to learn grammar intuitively, to treat it like a creative puzzle you're solving, not just a bunch of abstract rules you have to memorize. Here's how that works. First, you play detective with the phrases you already know. You look for patterns, like, it looks like the verb always goes at the end in this language. Then you try to use that pattern you found to create your own new sentence. And third, and this is the real game changer, you only open a grammar book to check your work. See the difference? You're not learning rules from the book. You're using the book to confirm the rules you figured out on your own.
From that point, you start expanding your skills. For reading, you can try something called shadowing. That's basically where you read a text while you're listening to the audio of it, trying to match the native speaker's pace and rhythm. And for writing, you can try reverse translation. Just find a short text, translate it into your own language, and then wait a day and try to translate it back without looking at the original. It's a killer way to test what you actually know.
Hey, remember all those vocabulary lists we were told to start with? Well, here's the crucial insight. This is when you finally start to focus on them. Once you have a foundation of phrases and a basic feel for the grammar, new words actually have a mental structure to slide into. They're not just floating around in your brain anymore. And the goal isn't to learn every word in the dictionary. For pretty much any daily conversation, you only need about 1,000 to 3,000 of the most common words. And when you learn them in the context of sentence patterns you already understand, that number, which seems huge, suddenly becomes a whole lot more manageable.
So we have the steps, but applying them really requires a pretty fundamental shift in how we think about our own progress. This is all about changing not just the what, but also the how.
It's so easy to measure our effort by time, right? I studied for 30 minutes today. But let's be honest, 30 minutes of just staring at a page can be totally useless. The effective mindset, the better mindset, shifts to measuring tasks completed. So don't say, I studied for an hour. Say, I learned 10 new phrases and I recorded myself saying them. This forces you to focus on your output, and that's the only thing that actually guarantees you're making real progress.
Now, all of this brings us to the most important concept that really ties this entire method together. We tend to think of learning as this very linear process. You finish step 1, then you move on to step 2, and so on. But that's just not how our brains work.
The actual process, it's a spiral. And understanding this one idea might be the most powerful part of Kazuma's entire method.
So what is spiral learning? It just means you never truly finish a step. You're always cycling back. As you learn a little bit of grammar from step 2, you suddenly go back and understand your basic phrases from step 1 on a much deeper level. And as you learn new phrases, you have more raw material to discover new grammar patterns. Everything constantly reinforces everything else. It's not a straight line, it's an upward spiral of getting better and better.
By just flipping that traditional order and embracing the spiral approach, all that frustration can be replaced with motivation and steady, real progress. So I guess the final question is pretty simple. After seeing this method, is it time to rethink how you learn?